Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
I don't understand some of the mentality behind parents that literally will, like you said, put a second mortgage on their home in order to send their kids to a school. It's like, holy crap. First of all, I don't know how they do it, but financially. But second of all, it's like, what are you teaching your kid when you do that? And when you pay for them to go to, if and they have no responsibility in it. They haven't had to, like you said, do the extra work to get the better grades in order to get the scholarship. It's the same as you go back to I don't want to connect these dots saying that if you provide everything for your kid, they're going to turn out to be murderers. But at the same time, I think, especially you look at Gen Z right now, they are so ill-equipped to actually handle reality and actually handle adulthood and what life is actually going to dole out to them, because they're going to learn one way or another. There's a limit to how much everybody can do,
No,
with the
you're
exception
absolutely
of
right.
just a few. But the problem is when we don't prepare the kids for actual reality, then once it actually hits them, then I think there's something about that snaps in them. They're like, I've been wronged. Somebody that some of them go one direction. They go, well, I was not taught well, and so I better hurry up and learn and figure this thing out. And they actually go the way of the responsible adult. And fortunately, that's, I think, 99% of people.
Right.
But then there's those other ones that you see that are in the McDonald's screaming at the people behind the counter,
Right.
pushing the napkins over and, knocking stuff off of the shelves and screaming and yelling and saying, "Where's my ketchup?" And
Right.
those are the people that you just look at them and you're like, whatever went wrong in your childhood and in, your life so far. Yeah, but they were clearly not taught that life is not fair. But those are the types that I think are in the category of the Menendez brothers, that they're willing to take it so far, and once they actually snap. But I think a big part of it is they just have such a uh, a wrong perception of what life is about, and they just don't get it. So,
Yeah. I mean, I think it was very clear to me that they came from just great wealth, and I think that when you're in an environment where there is that kind of access to wealth, it really does distort your perception of the world, because you're not. So I think as parents, particularly if you're in a situation where you are, I mean, I don't even consider myself wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, but I do recognize that I was able to give my kids a lot more than, say, my parents were able to give me.
sure. Well, and it's
And
like you said, that's everybody's goal in life, and
right,
that's the way it should be. But
absolutely. But
yeah,
also understanding that, like, that it's I remember saying to my daughter one time that you know I'm you are I the only rights that you have in this house is to be fed, to be clothed, to be in school, and have a place to sleep. The rest of it is gravy. The rest of it is privileges.
mm-hmm.
And I reserve the right to suspend those privileges when you do not do what is expected of you. It's that simple.
Yeah.
You, my friend, I said, this it's funny because a dear friend of mine is actually, she's a, so I borrow this phrase from her, but you know, when her kids act up, she says that they're on a PIP, a performance improvement plan. So that's the thing. You're not doing your job in this house, which is you know um, maintain your work, do well in school, um, do what I ask you to do. If don't lie, don't cheat, all those things. And if and again, it's like I, she has the platinum plan because she can come home and she can, relax, and she can, she has supportive parents. She has a lot of things that these are privileges, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I think a lot of that is what's missing, because you're really not entitled to anything other than from your parents, other than food, clothes, you know,
Yeah. No,
and,
I would say
education.
if your parents legitimately are not feeding you and giving you a
Right.
place to sleep, then yeah, you've got something to complain about.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
but short of
Exactly.
that, yeah, it's I'm
Yeah.
sorry, life is not fair. So, one of the things that I wanted to ask you as a social worker, how many years were you a social worker?
Let's see. I guess I would say about 10 years I was in
Okay,
that field.
but you also specialized in kind of domestic violence.
Well, let me tell you, I worked in a crisis shelter for victims fleeing domestic violence situation. So it was like a situation where the shelter was a 24-hour crisis shelter. So I did that.
Mm,
And I also worked with women who were navigating addiction, substance abuse issues,
mm,
and raising children.
mm.
So was working and interacted with women that it was actually one of the only shelters that provided a place to stay for women in recovery with their children. So yeah,
I'm sure you've seen some pretty horrible things, and
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very sad. It's very sad, and it's like
yeah.
pretty grueling and intense.
So what do you think is from your? I know this is anecdotal, but from your experience of as a social worker in that environment, what was like the number one reason that people would get hooked on the drugs? Is they just to escape from the reality of their life?
The interesting thing too is the one thing that I recognize about like addictions is that it knows no socioeconomic, um, it knows no bound. It is something that can happen to anybody. And it
Hmm.
does, whether you're, a six-figure person, making a person making six figures and have two houses, or a person that literally doesn't have a pot to piss in. Um, Honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with your makeup genetically. I mean, there is a connection genetic wise. Often, it can be traced back in some way to um, DNA genetics. Um, and I think also too, it can be set off situationally. Like, what is it that's, setting it off, Is it, a lot of it is an untreated mental illness. A lot of it is self-medicating, undiagnosed depression, undiagnosed anxiety. I think there's a lot of that. And then,
Say,
yeah, and it's just like there's lots of different levels to it too, And you
yeah,
have people that are so deeply entwined with their addiction that, you know, they can't seem to free themselves of it, you
yeah.
know? I mean, I,
Well,
I, I, I know people that have addictions that are like these very strange people in the sense that they're stealing and well, I mean, I don't know how strange that is, but but there is that, you know,
yeah,
fragment of, and then you have people that successfully resolve their addiction and move forward in their life clean.
yeah. I've always thought that God created us in nearly perfection, with the exception of one one major vice, and this is just life according to Jared here, but the I I think every single one of us has one of those vices that call it a potential addiction, whatever, something that is going to haunt us our entire lives. And I think one of the major, um, yeah, we're way deep in the weeds now, aren't we? But
Yeah.
uh, but
We're in it,
yeah,
Jared.
here we go. All right. Um, but honestly, I think that whatever that vice is, I think in order for us to actually be a functioning adult and be able to actually thrive, you have to harness. Yeah, and you'll never fully overcome it, but you have to harness and uh, put it in a cage so that it doesn't destroy your life, because otherwise it becomes the monster that ultimately brings you down. And I think whether it's greed or whether it's
Hmm.
you know addiction to substances like alcohol or drugs, whether it's addiction to pornography, whether it's addiction to something, there's
Yeah.
something out there that, and maybe it's entitlement, maybe it's the inability to figure out who's responsible for your life, that those kind of things, whatever your vice is. um I mean, all of us have lots of vices, but I think there's always going to be one major one that the people that, like you're describing, the people that are addicted to the drugs and end up in a shelter.
Hmm.
They're, especially the women that are abused by their husbands.
Hmm.
That husband has some kind of a violence vice, that he has not harnessed yet, and
Right.
life has not taught him how to harness it in a way that makes him a functioning adult. And so
Right.
to me that's like, nobody's perfect, everybody has that thing. And I think the people that are successful in life, they have learned what it is. They have either been able to flip it and make it their, um, make it an asset for themselves, or they've been able to box it and cage it in a way that it doesn't destroy the rest of their efforts. And I've just I think I know what mine is, and I think I've got a decent handle on it. Um, but like I said, every single one of us, I believe, has one of those major things. And until you find out what it is, and until you harness it, or control it and not let it control you, then you'll never fully reach the point where you are. And I think, unfortunately, there's far too many of us that in today's society where we're not constantly. I mean, you think about it, especially if you've, I don't know how much travel internationally you've done, but and you probably don't even need to travel internationally, but the United States especially is such
Hmm.
a We have so many conveniences that
Right.
uh, our ability to um, live a life of complete I don't want to say luxury because that means something different to everybody, but 99% of us, and it's probably 99.9% of us have never really been hungry.
Right. Right.
You've never actually had to fight on a literally day-to-day basis on where your next meal is going to come from. And the people that are homeless and things like that, a lot of them are homeless because they choose to be homeless, and not because they're forced to be homeless. It's there's help out there. And I think with our country, we're so blessed that we are capable of providing for all of our citizens. It is absolutely unparalleled, because when you travel internationally, and I've gotten around,
Yeah.
a
With the
lot of different places
military,
in the world.
yeah.
Well, I traveled much more with my job than
Right. Right. Then
uh, you know talking MVAC systems. But um, when you go internationally, especially to some of these third world countries, Myanmar and Vietnam and places like that, even Africa, holy crap, that's when you see the people literally. And I haven't been to India yet, but it's on my docket. And they say a third of the children that are starving in India, and so the level of poverty there for even children that are so malnourished, you just
it's
you
crazy.
you don't see that kind of thing in this country. And so because of that, I guess my point is, we're blessed enough that if you are having that level of struggle, it's because you haven't figured out what your vice is. And
There's something to be said for that. I think you might be onto something. And
well,
I think,
I guess my question, based on that 10-minute rant there, um, based on your experience as a social worker, would you be able to categorize some of those people based on that?
absolutely. I mean, look, here's the thing, you know, um, a lot of the population that I worked with were poor, underserved populations. Um, and there had to be a focus, a dedication. And again, a lot of, see, and that's the thing too, like, because you're also with each person, you're mulling through all these individual stuff. I mean, and rarely did I, and I'll tell you, rarely did I have a client come to me with the only issue being homelessness.
Hmm.
A lot of my clients came from backgrounds of serious dysfunction, absent, neglectful parents, parents that were themselves addicted, or abused. And, I think there has to come a point, and not everybody does this though, where you have to reckon with that and basically tear it down and build it back up. Meaning, everything that I grew up with, everything that I saw, everything that I was fed, I have to toss it out and start from the beginning. Like
Hmm.
me, for example, I grew up my father was extremely violent and abusive, towards my mother, towards me and my sister. He was the angriest and scariest man I've ever known in my life. Um, like, getting your ass whipped was the order of the day. And it didn't even need to be a reason because, it. And so I grew up being afraid, and I grew up being sneaky because it wasn't. So I understood that as I grew up, that I had to relearn the world if I was going to have healthy relationships, if I was going to have children. And for a while, I was like, I'm not having kids. I can't trust that. I had to deconstruct and build it back up.
Mhm.
And it was a lot. And I understand that not everybody is up to the task. I could have very well have leaned into addiction. I very well could have, there were just so many ways that a person can go
Yeah.
when they haven't been given the tools to move and to grow up and move ahead in their lives.
Yeah.
So it really is, in my, from my perspective, there before the grace of God go I. What was it? And this is what I would try to impart to my clients. Like, what are you going to do to change the trajectory of your life? What do you need to do? And, for me, it started with just saying and using the way some people would use the template of the way that they were raised. Like, well, my father was this, and I love that about him. I do the opposite. I say, how was I raised? Yeah, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm
Yeah.
not doing that. An ass whipping in my house is not the first order of the day in raising my daughter. However, there were times when,
Yeah, there's always those times, but again, the if your vice is violence toward others, then that could have easily been the violence that you perpetuated from your father down to
right,
your
absolutely,
offspring. But
absolutely,
I think you hit on a key to everything, where you basically said what you did with your clients is you looked them in the eye and you said, okay, what are you going to do to help your life get out of there? And I just think that question right there, or something similar, is what is missing in most of society today, especially with the Gen Zers, the people that nobody has ever asked them that. Said, what are you going to do to take control of your life and move it forward in a way that is positive? Because they've always been given everything in life. And the, uh, I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they're like, um, they have Gen Zers that work for them,
right,
and they're like, if you go in, it's say they screw up a project or screw up some kind, they mess something up.
right,
If you
right,
go
right,
and actually correct them and say, okay, this is jacked up, uh, you need to fix it, and this is how you fix it, we'll help you fix it, but and then the next day they're not at work. they just they and you say, hey, where's Bobby? And he's like, well, he had such a horrible day yesterday that he needed a day off.
You need a mental health day.
And you're like, wait, what? Okay, so as far as I know, the only thing that actually happened that was horrible yesterday to him was me talking to him. And
Right,
it's
right,
like,
right,
so being just, if being corrected and told to, do it again, is so traumatic that you have to take a day off. It's like, okay, clearly,
yeah,
we're lacking a little intestinal fortitude here. So, um, yeah, I remember, my boys when they were younger. Well, we adopted them when they were just toddlers, and but one of the things, they would get in trouble, and I'd be like, okay, push-ups,
right, right,
and
right,
I'd make them get down and do push-ups. But the thing is, I would get down and do push-ups with them,
right, right,
and
right,
so I was trying to be an example to them, and I knew that these boys didn't have the background that uh, my like my daughters did, because I had them from the moment they were born.
right, right,
And
right,
so,
right,
I
right.
had to instill in them something different. And I think there's just far too many of us in today's society that we never actually get down and do the hard work with them, and
That's
show them
true.
how to
That's
do it.
true. Look,
And be,
parenting is not for the faint of heart. It
no,
is not for the faint of heart. It was the
no.
hardest thing I've ever done.
Oh yeah.
being responsible for another human being 100%. It was the most, I mean, you have to, like you said, when you said you got to get down there and do push-ups with them, like that's how you parent. And it sucks because you don't want to have to do push-ups with them. But it's like that's what you have to do. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, when my daughter was grounded and she would have to, and of course she would whine about, being grounded and how it's not fair. And I don't want to hear that shit. And I want to say, can you shut the fuck up? But instead, I'm like, well, how did we get here? Let's talk about that. I didn't do it. You did this. This is all in your making. So when you're like, this isn't fair and I'm grounded and I don't get to, ask yourself why. Ask
Yeah.
yourself why. I mean, yeah, it's exhausting.
Well, that's that one moment, I think. And the big moment is usually consists of lots of little moments, but the fact that you taught your daughter that, I think, is one of the things that's lacking, severely lacking in today's society. Is nobody has ever taken these kids aside, and it doesn't matter what socioeconomic area they're in, because you can
Exactly.
see it.
No, it
You can
really
see it
doesn't.
in wealthy families, and you can see it in super poor families. But nobody has actually taken these young people aside and said,
Absolutely no. No.
you have to take responsibility for your family, for yourself.
Right. You
And
have
if
to
you're,
figure it out. You have to
yeah,
make it make sense for
yeah,
yourself. I mean,
absolutely.
which is absolute key. I mean, and yeah, I think that like there sort of comes this, you know, it really just kind of speaks to just what a lack of discipline can do to a person,
Mm,
because a lack of discipline sort of bleeds into the, why should I have to worry about consequences? Why should I have to X, Y, and Z? Like I think that in the world of the wealthy in particular, you know, everything is so accessible that you don't necessarily have to think about the grind of getting things. So I wonder if maybe, like when I think about the Joel Guy story and the Menendez brothers, when everything just was so just there, and then suddenly or in some way you're, you know, it just, you're thinking of and it's crazy because you're thinking of the most, in what they perceive to be the most convenient way. But none of it has to do with what they can do. None of it has to do with what they can do to move forward in their lives. It's it's like, I can finish school, I can get work, I can, live my life while my parents retire. Um, the Menendez brother, I could, you know, take the resources that are available to me, go to school, or
yeah.
not, start a business, whatever it is, move out, go somewhere, start over, you know. Instead, it's not reflective. Like there's no self-reflection here, which is so important, and that's another thing with, that I'm all about. And I think, I think it's part of my social work background, but even not, I've always been a person that is about self-reflection. And it's always something that I've encouraged in, my family, my kid, let's take a look at your actions. Like, because it's easy to look at what the other person is doing. It's easy, but let's look at ourselves, because at the end of the day, that's where our control is what we do and how we choose to show up in the world. And,
Right.
we have control over that.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.